Anthony Saidy, or Saidy, I'm not sure how it's pronounced. I think it's Saidy, Anthony Saidy. He was an MD, Saidy was, and also a fairly close friend of Bobby Fischer, somewhat older, but yeah, he played a mentor role in Bobby's life for some of his early years. Bobby with E4 and C5 by Saidy. Knight F3, and here we have the old Sicilian defense, at which I laugh every time I see it pop up on my screen, because when I was a kid, it was just known as the Sicilian defense. It wasn't old yet, and neither was I. D4 leads to the open Sicilian, and knight takes D4. We have knight F6 here. Knight C3, D6. And here we have Sozin's attack, Veniamin Sozin, who lived from 1896 to 1956. He was a Soviet chess master, active in the 1920s and 1930s. And he was a noted chess theorist, contributing many articles to the Moscow magazine Shakhmatny Vestnik. He wrote 2 books. And this opening was popularized again by Bobby Fischer, so sometimes it's known as the Fischer-Sozin attack. Nowadays, anyway. Back then, it was just known as Sozin's attack. E5 hits the knight. Knight F5 gets a star. The book move is knight D to E2. And that line continues with bishop E6, putting the question to its counterpart. Bishop B3, bishop E7, and both sides castle. You could also retreat your knight. That would be playable, I would think. You get a check mark. You'd probably still see similar ideas as bishop E7, bishop E3, and castling. That transposes to a book. What do you know? It just goes to show you, if you play principled moves, sometimes you play book moves totally by accident. Bobby with knight F5 gets a star. And I thought bishop takes knight might be interesting. Saidy played bishop to E6, getting a star. I thought this was an interesting move. What does it get? It gets a thumbs up. And here, you get a star and a star. I mean, it's at least equal. Let's go back. Bishop E6 was Saidy's choice. Bishop B3. Now bishop takes knight. That's interesting. But now it gets a question mark in favor of knight takes the pawn here, removing the defender. Yeah, that would compel bishop takes bishop, and after pawn takes bishop, you desperado this knight with check. Ooh, double exclam! Oh, ho, ho. Coach Daniel gets a double exclam for his desperado. Anyway, after bishop takes, then you take the knight. Black gets this really big center here, as well as a development advantage. The exposure of the black king is white's compensation. In fact, you don't have to run away right away. You can hit the queen. Now, if check, then you can hit the queen again. Ooh, an exclam. There are a lot of checks that can be given. Queen H5, for example, if Queen C7, Queen H5 can be played. Only when there are no more checks to give do you have to move your... Well, here I would actually go ahead and play knight G5 because that threatens this fork. So he'd have to defend. Okay, or E7. Either or. Anyway, none of that came about. Instead, bishop takes the knight. Pawn takes the bishop. Bishop E7 gets a star. Queen D7, probably not so good here. No. Bishop E7, and you're ready to castle. But the point of queen d7, the idea of queen to d7, hitting this pawn here, but inaccurate at this juncture. Get your king safe. Bishop g5. Bishop e3 is also an option. That gets a thumbs up. A bot recommending bishop e3. Now castles, as mentioned on the previous move, and Bobby also castles. Knight d4. Bishop takes knight. Bishop takes knight. Queen d3. Bot calling for queen h5. Bishop d5 looks interesting to me, but it's inaccurate. Anyway, queen d3 was played. Queen d7, adding another attacker. a5 being called for. Pawn f4, that gets a question mark. Knight takes the bishop, pawn takes the knight, queen's pawn takes the knight, and pawn takes the pawn. Now rook takes the pawn, and bishop e5. Rook f3, queen d8, knight d5. And that, of course, threatens f6, which would be absolutely winning. Queen h4, meant to prevent f6. By the way, don't play a greedy Gus move like bishop takes pawn here, because now I will play f6. Double exclam! Second double exclam of the game for Coach Daniel. Wow. And, you know, rook h3 can be played. There are all kinds of things that can be played here. If you play rook e8 to try to run away, I'll go ahead and play rook h3. Oh, it says that's inaccurate. Just when I was bragging about my double exclam. Anyway, queen h4 by Saidy. Rook a4. White is really on a roll here. Queen does take the pawn here. King f2 and queen h5. That's a blunder. b5 was needed to hold this game. b5, that's quite interesting move. Forcing the rook to move. I'll go to g4 here. And then queen h5 can be played. Aha. I get an exclam for that. I will point out that Greedy Gus is still a blunder here. Double question mark. And once again, f6 will be played. Only this time I only get one exclam instead of two. Well, you know, the point is, if he tries to escape now with rook e8, rook h3's got to win now because that queen is a dead duck. I'm threatening mate in two. He has to give up the queen. You can't play something like queen here. It's just check and mate. Or yeah, you could mate him here too. Take your pick of checkmates. Take your pick. The eval bar prefers to capture more material, greedy. Anyway, so he has to give up his queen. It must be played. And I'll probably take it with my queen. Winning all day from there. All right, so queen h5 was played, incurring the wrath of the annotator. Knight e7 check. Oh boy, this is delish. I mean, this is just an easy win now. We've got an Anastasia set up right here. Open this up with a clearance sacrifice on h7, and you will have won the game. Bobby Fischer with rook h3, hitting the queen. Queen g5. Please take that pawn. He does. Double exclam for Bobby Fischer. And then after king takes the rook, pawn f6, discovered check. Oh man, that only got one exclam. That almost deserves another double exclam. g6. Now queen h3, another exclam. Queen h5 and rook h5, another exclam. Bobby Fischer with exclam, exclam, double exclam, 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 exclam. 6 consecutive moves marked with either great or brilliancy. Here, Saidy tried bishop takes f6. Rook takes queen, pawn takes rook, queen takes pawn check, king g7, knight f5 check, king g8. And amazing to me is this blunder by Bobby Fischer. I cannot get my head wrapped around it. Look at the eval bar. Bobby Fischer played c3 here. Now look at the eval bar. It's practically in the middle. The winning move is queen h6. And the point now is that hits this bishop, and that's going to force a checkmate. First of all, where can the bishop go? If he comes to h8, let's start with that. If he comes to h8, that's a blunder, because that's checkmate. He can't come to g7, because that's checkmate. Anywhere he comes that doesn't give check, knight e7 is checkmate. That's my point. So if he moves along this diagonal, well, those squares are hot, and that square is hot. If he moves along this diagonal, the magic square now is checkmate. So poor bishop is overworked. It has to defend both of these checkmate squares. If it leaves the defense of g7, the queen gives checkmate, and if it leaves the defense of e7, the knight gives checkmate. Somehow Bobby missed that. And the only other thing he can do is stall with a check, but that's just not fast enough because the knight can go right back. Now, if you say, well, I'll keep the knight from coming back by playing my pawn to f5 so the knight cannot come back. Well, now I have check here, and then my knight will come here for the checkmate. And there's no stopping it. You can delay. First of all, if you come here, this is checkmate. And if you come here, you just delay by one move, and there's no stopping it. If you cover g7, this is always checkmate every day. So Fischer, after a spectacular game, this must have been a heartbreaking loss. Shocking, shocking miss by Bobby Fischer. Oh my, when he went over this game, he must have kicked himself for a week or more. What a heartbreaking miss. I have had misses like this in my own tournament games, and they are bitter pills to swallow. You think I get upset when I lose online games while playing distracted during a stream. Oh my goodness, I literally cry over misses like this. I mean, real tears. I mean, it just leaves such a sickening feeling in your gut. It's just like having been gut punched. No, he didn't lose the game, but he should have won it in just a couple moves. Here is Saidy played queen's rook to e8, knight takes pawn, rook e5 hitting the queen, queen g4 check, rook g5 hitting the queen, queen f4, rook g6, knight e4 hitting the bishop by super attack. He could have picked up a pawn. This also prevents bishop g5. Yeah, I mean, if you take the pawn, I'm going to play bishop g5, and then queen would have to move. Anyway, knight e4 prevents bishop g5, so bishop g7, and his king is pretty safe here, all of a sudden. Bishop d8 is also possible. The bot says bishop e7. I would think bishop d8 is fine as well. It is. But bishop g7, g3... Queen c7 being called for, skewer these pawns, try to get something. Rook e8, king g2, knight d6 is a much more active move, defended by your queen. He'd have to move. Oh, you could try this, though. You know what? I'll take 2 rooks for a queen. I still have 3-2 over here. There's still the smidgen of hope. Bobby with king g2. Bishop e5, that is twice defended by our knight and king. Queen f5, pawn b6, pawn b4, bishop g7, queen f3, queen f4 being called for, rook ge6, preventing knight d6. Yeah, the bot calling for bishop e5. In my opinion, rook e5 is also a good move. Get this rook in a better place. I get a star for that. Knight G5, Rook F6. Oops, that was a mouse slip. Rook F6, Queen H5, Queen D3 should also be possible here. Queen D1 preferred by the bot. I get a thumbs up. Queen H5, Rook E5. Rook G6 being called for. Bishop H6. I'd come back to Queen G4. Or maybe I would even just take here. Yeah, that would lead to a repetition. If Bishop H6, I'll take, and that leads to a simplification and a repetition. Rook E5, Queen H7 check, King F8, Knight E4 blunders, trapping his queen. Oh my goodness. Bobby went from a forced mate to a drawn position to dead lost right here. Do you see how to win the trapped queen? It's not quite trapped yet. You actually have to trap it. But this path of escape has been blocked by his own knight. And so how do we block this path of escape? So he had to play Queen D3. That's right. Carlton, defended by the bishop. Amazingly, somehow, 2367 rated National Master Anthony Saidy missed the winning move. I mean, just as shocking as it is, and this just goes to show you, this is what we call mutual blindness. For one thing, you just don't expect players of this caliber to make blunders of this caliber. But inexplicable is Rook G6. And the eval bar back to dead center. Queen H4, rub your brow. Rook E8. So I guess both players got a kick in the gut. Because Bobby had a forced mate. Saidy missed a free game. You could also double your rooks here, I would think. And if Queen D8, then interpose and so forth. Anyway, Rook E8 prevents Queen D8. Queen F4. Bishop E5 preventing Knight D6. Queen F5. Bobby said, hey, let's call this a draw. They shook hands and Bobby walked away with half a point that should have been a whole point, but then should have been a goose egg. So no harm, no foul in the end. But yeah, what's worse? Whose kick in the gut is worse, do you think? The guy who had a forced mate in just a few moves and missed it? Or the guy who got lucky and his opponent missed checkmate and then he was glad to have a draw, so I don't know, I think it's a bigger kick in the gut for white. But I'm sure when Black realized later on, I'm sure he would have realized that, oh man, I missed trapping the queen. That's still a sick feeling.